Hello and welcome to Black, Brown, and Bilingue, where our mission is to unite the Black and Brown communities through education, storytelling, and community engagement. Welcome into another episode of Black, Brown, and Bilingue. We are so excited today to have made a connection through Twitter to somebody who is really just changing the game of speech and language therapy, literally. And so we're going to get a chance to talk about that. Our guest today is hailing from South London, and her name is Warda Farah. She is a speech and language therapist and founder of Language Waves. Language Waves specializes in using an array of methods to provide culturally diverse therapeutic input for schools and local communities. The service was specifically set up to address the barriers that minority families face when accessing speech and language therapy services. And so again, we are so excited to have you here. Welcome into Black, Brown, and Bilingue.
I'm excited to be here.
So why don't we jump right into some conversation here? Lisette and I have kind of been following you on Twitter. Through there, we kind of were doing some other searches, and we saw a recent presentation that you did from even the beginning of this year. And there was a phrase that you used that I had not really heard before. And so I'm going to give you the credit for it, okay? As having coined this phrase of language violence, that you talked about having experienced it as a kid. Let's jump right in. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of that phrase and how it fits into some of the work that you've done as a speech and language therapist?
Yeah, I'm sure there's some sort of linguist or social linguist out there that has probably coined that phrase before me. But for me, it was something that I felt in terms of right now I'm at a stage in my life where I'm looking back at my history. And I feel like I can see it with more clarity. And there are moments in my life where I know that for a large part, I experienced this thing called language violence, where when I spoke in my white voice, I was safe and I was good. And when I was me in my full expression, whether that is with my body, whether it was with my hands, or whether it was just talking how I want to talk, I experienced a violence in a way that was sort of like demeaning, telling me that I was not any good, that I need to change how I speak. Literally, sometimes I was told I need to change how I speak. And I suppose we kind of connote violence with something physical. But for me, I think it's the violence that happens to you that's not physical that hurts more sometimes, because you don't even know when it's happening to you. When somebody punches you or kicks you, you feel it instantly, you know it, you can see the bruise. When you experience things such as language violence, where people make you feel less than for how you speak, it's something that you don't even know it's happening at the time. As a child, it forms you, it develops you. And it's only when you get to a point in your own development, maybe as an adult, or you're reflecting, that you realize how violent people have been to you and how you've been taking those hits emotionally and psychologically. So that's what I feel language violence is to me.
And as we were listening, you've said that the SLT profession is biopolitical, colonial, and racist. Can you explain that a little bit? And, given your experience, is that what made you want to become an SLT?
So I'll start off with, when I became an SLT, I didn't know it was biopolitical, colonial, and racist. I didn't know that. Sure. I thought I was doing a service. I thought I was doing social good. My training told me to believe that there was such a thing as a communication difficulty, that some children were born with these disorders and these difficulties. And I was trained to find deficit in communication. And so I actually did do that. And I did practice in those ways that committed language violence onto others. Because we do, what's happened to us, we do to others. And so I use my professional power to do those things. And then it was that, you know, I got to a very early stage in my career, probably 3 months after qualifying. I was working in the National Health Service, and things just didn't feel right to me. So, for example, I would be with clients and we would just be talking, and I'd want to find out more about their lives, but there wasn't enough time in an appointment. And there was just this feeling that I thought, something's not quite right here, because I keep seeing Black and brown families being referred for communication difficulties, but when they're with me, I feel I totally get them. And I don't think this is an issue of communication. I think this is an issue of systematic racism, of poverty, of the ill health. So I could see all these other things and not the communication. And so I left that National Health Service, and I thought, let me go work for a private provider. So that's somebody who has their own company. Maybe there's, you know, more freedom to practice and learn how I want to do that. And so when I was in that company, the same thing happened. It was in South London, and I was in what you would call like high school. So children that were from the age of 12 to 15, 16. Once again, the caseload was Black and brown children, mostly Afro-Caribbean boys. And I was thinking, why am I putting these boys through this system where I'm using a standardized language assessment? They're failing that standardized language assessment. The areas that they fail in, I train them on. So when we retake, and then I give them some therapy. So when we retake that test, they've gone up, but it just didn't seem right. So I left that job as well.
Wow.
I left that job. Well, I was kind of pushed out, because what happened was, once I realized that the assessments didn't work for those children and the therapy didn't work for those children, I thought, well, what do they need? So I just started spending time with them and working on goal setting and self-esteem and confidence, and just allowing them to use their own voice. And like, for the first time in my life, I was actually listening to children rather than imposing my professional will on them. And it was through that I learned that actually these children just have their own code, and everybody has their own code. And so because I don't have access to that code, doesn't mean that code is at a deficit.
Oh my goodness. You know, in one of our very first episodes, I talk about how I really feel like my bilingualism was stripped away from me, because I remember being a little girl and having to translate in meetings for my parents, right? So that they could communicate with my teachers. And even though my teacher never said anything disparaging, like explicitly, the fact that she didn't even acknowledge, you know, what I was doing, you know, filled me with shame. And you're a little kid and you don't know how to process that. But I just remember feeling extremely embarrassed, uncomfortable. And I really forged a school identity and a home identity. And I wish that I would have had even just a little bit of acknowledgement that, you know, it's great that I could speak 2 languages or anything. But I really became uncomfortable to speak Spanish in public settings, in formal settings, I should say.
I experienced the same thing. And I guess it's these kind of languages that there's like a totem pole of, you know, French, and this is like the best. So if you speak that, you're bilingual, that's amazing, we love that. But if you speak so I would say prestigious languages, those European languages that are valued, and then low prestige languages, so like Amharic and Somali and Arabic, and you know, it's not seen as a skill. It's not seen as something that's an important language. And I felt the same. I felt very ashamed because I spoke multiple languages. And at school, I wouldn't speak any of those languages. And if my grandma would pick me up and want to speak to me in whatever language, I wouldn't acknowledge her as a child.
Wow, yeah.
There was this shame and guilt associated with my white teacher, or my not even my Black friends from, you know, different backgrounds, seeing me speak these languages. It made me feel less than, and I had this preference for English is the language of success, and English is the language of what a normal person is.
Yeah, It's funny, you literally just used a phrase, right? The idea of English as the language of success. Lisette mentioned earlier, we have a PD that we've done a couple of times that we've entitled Language of Success, elevating languages other than, and even the phrase standard English, right, is wrapped in some politics itself, right? Who sets that standard? Can you talk a little bit, perhaps now from an adult perspective, how much was language really tied to identity? I think for us, it's something we talk about a lot. I was always told that I spoke white, and you also have used the phrase, right, that white voice. And I think for a long time, I understood that to mean that I spoke what we have defined as eloquently, or I spoke, but it's always tied to these positive, right, concepts, and that's white, which then inherently defines
anything
not
else.
That as the opposite. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what has your experience been with that, moving from childhood into adulthood and in the field in which you practice?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. As a child, my grandma lived with us, and she's a huge influence in my life. And I remember when I grew up, I would at home I'd speak my home languages, and then at school I'd speak English. But they got to a point when I was about 4 or 5 where I made a conscious decision I like speaking English, so I'd speak English at home. And my grandma had this whole big thing about, no, you speak your languages. Your languages are you. I don't want you to lose your language. And I remember as a child thinking, what is she talking about? As an adult, I am so grateful that my grandmother was in that home and made me, because she made me speak these languages. And now that I speak these languages, not only am I connected to family and friends and people in East Africa, across the world, I even have a different personality in my languages. So it's me. So I feel so blessed that my grandma was in my life, and she just kept going at me. And actually my Amharic, my Somali, it's like I speak like traditional because I'm that person there. I never valued it, but today I value it so much. And so that's why it's so important. Whenever I'm with children, I want to know, what languages do you speak? And I want them to bring it to me, and I almost kind of praise them for it, because I go, wow, you speak this and you speak this and you speak that, because that is an asset. And it is an identity, because it's it's a whole nother person. You're a whole nother person when you're speaking those languages. And
it's interesting you say that. I often talk about how thankful I am, on a very superficial level. I understand more jokes, right? We're a digital generation, so I get twice the funny memes, right? Because it's in 2 languages, or even that idea of having a different identity based on the language that I speak. I'm a mother. I have 2 little beautiful boys, and I mother them in Spanish. Like, when I'm showing love and affection, my default is to do it in Spanish. And I think that is so critical, that when we place judgment on a language or even a dialect, we're not just passing judgment on that individual, but on their whole community and in the way that they experience love and affection. So we have to be very careful about, love elevating one over the other.
Yeah. I was thinking too, you mentioned just when you had first started as a speech and language therapist, that you found yourself just not having enough time. I'll just drop this here, and then I've got a question, but there's a really interesting TED Talk by Brittany Cooper called The Racial Politics of Time. And in it, she kind of talks about how time itself has an impact that is disparate based on your racial identity. The amount of time based on your socioeconomic status, right? The amount of time you get to spend working versus the amount of time that you get to spend living or being with family.
Leisure time.
Man. And so I listened to this TED Talk because I pulled it up. I was like, what is she talking about? Time is time. Time is linear, but time is not. Time has a social political piece to it as well. So when you talk about taking the time to get to know families or even the way we communicate, is it circular? I started listening to myself when I actually doing the podcast. I'd go back and I'd hear myself make a point, talk around it, and then come back to finalize it with that point. And for some people, that's a waste of time. But for me, that's my communication style because my mama does it and my daddy, so just some of those things I think are really interesting.
Do you know what I love about that point about time is time is really important to me now. And I have more time now than I have ever had before because I make a conscious effort that I need it. Because time to think is so rare in this society and in this world. And to make those leaps and bounds and things that I want to do, I have to have time. But it's it's a capitalist thing. It's negotiating this time because you never have time to think and you never have time to implement the real changes that you want to implement. And it's like you're always on the hamster wheel. And so for me, taking myself away from that, which meant a loss in earnings, but my God, in terms of my life, it's absolutely amazing.
You bring up an excellent point. Actually, Maurice and I, our day jobs were building principles. And I often get frustrated by the hamster wheel because to me, time is of the essence, right? Like if I don't have the luxury or the time to rest, to think, to just even take care of myself, I really do struggle with that. But to bring it back to this, so you worked for this company, you left, and you started your own, right? You started your own company called Making Waves. Is that, yeah?
Language Waves.
Language Waves. Look at me making waves.
We do make waves though. We do make waves though.
Well, I was thinking of the waves I made this week at work. So Language Waves. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I'm so excited that you did that. There are times where I think what can I do if I step away from my current role?
Well, Language Waves is like my oops baby. It's just it was unplanned. It was really, really unplanned. So as I said, when I left that second job, I was so disenfranchised with the whole profession. I actually left the profession because I thought it was because I was a rubbish therapist that I couldn't do the things I wanted to do. I left it and I went into research at the Stroke Association. So I thought if I can become a researcher, I don't need to work in the politics of people and all these kinds of things. I can do my own thing. So I'm in that and I was planning to do a PhD. As I'm planning to do my PhD, I get an email from a previous student that I had worked with that had just got into university. And so this was somebody who was caught up in a lot of things and was failing and nobody had the time for him. And I made sure that I had the time for him. And we did that goal setting and that planning when he was, I think, about 14. We planned his future for him because he didn't have anybody else to do that with. And so I got this email where he was just like, Warda, I got into university. I want to say thank you. What the work that we did has really, it's all come true and it set me up. And he, at the end of the bottom of that email, it's like, who else are you helping now? ? And I had to go back to him and go, I'm really happy for you, but I'm not a speech and language therapist anymore. I don't really believe in the profession. I'm doing this. And so he came back to me and he said, why don't you do it for yourself? And he was like, you believed in me. Why don't you believe in yourself? You can do it. And it was like this. I'm telling you.
That is beautiful.
It was like, you see, when people talk about the universe does things. I was really set on what I was planning to do. I was ready to go for this. I had left this speech language therapy thing behind. And it was a full circle moment. When he said to me, you believed in me, why don't you believe in yourself? I thought, it was like an existential crisis because I was all this time I've been telling children to believe in themselves. I've never believed in myself, And so for him to say that to me was God, have I been a fraud this whole time, telling people things that I don't even believe about myself? And how can that be? So language waves is really selfishly all about me and like proving a point to myself. And so when he said to me, he sent me this thing. He said, there's, in the UK, we've got this thing called the Princess Trust, which is like for young people 16 to before you turn 30, they give you support to set up a business. So they will, you know, give you the training, and it's Prince Charles is, he's the patron of the charity. So, you know, and so I was 29, going to be turning 30. And he sent me the link to the Princess Trust. And so it was like, oh, it's now or never. So I mean, it just literally, I just did it, not knowing what it was going to be. I just did it. And I think a month later, I left my job. I didn't have, because I am like impulsive. I'm a fire sign, so I just do things. And like I made a choice. I made a decision. I said, I'm going to try this, and I'm going to try and make something out of this for like the next 5-6 months. I've got a little bit of money saved up. I'm just going to go for it. I don't know what it is. I don't even know what I offer that is so special, but I'm going to go and do it. And that's how Language Waves started. And it's coming up to 3 years now. And it's transformed me as a person. It's been really, it's really difficult, because the time and effort that you put in before you get anything out, there is no money in it. And so, but there's progress, and there's a sense of time and freedom linked to it. And where I say I was very lucky was I don't have any dependents. And so the decision for me was, if I run out of money and I don't have anything to eat, well, it's only me that I'm worried about. I don't have anybody else to look after. So it was the right time in my life to do it.
Oh
yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. There's a whole piece of entrepreneurship in there that we really could explore. My older brother, who's a former guest on BBB, is a serial entrepreneur, and he talked about the number of times he failed before he got there. So we're grateful for you that you hit that ground running. I wanted to ask, because I took note of this, again, as Lisette mentioned, we both work in elementary schools, and in our buildings, we both have full-time speech and language pathologists.
Yeah.
And you all, and I don't know if it's a UK thing or a choice by you, but I've taken note of speech and language therapist. And I think this is incredibly important, because I looked up the word pathologist, and I think it speaks a lot to perhaps why you left the field. Right, a pathologist is somebody who diagnoses diseases. And so it's this premise, right, that like somebody has a disease in their speech and language, as opposed to, I don't know. So I guess, can you talk a little bit about maybe the way in which you're viewing speech and language therapy differently than a speech and language pathologist, right? Which is what, again, most American schools are using, or even others, SLTs in the UK.
Firstly, can I just say, I'll share an interesting fact with you. In the United States, speech and language pathology is the 4th whitest profession in the whole of the United States. After farmers, dentists, lawyers, it's speech language pathologists.
I did not know that.
It's wow. Hella white, right? It's really, really white. Okay. I don't know why in the UK we called it therapy, but I do know across the world, so like Australia, South Africa, all of the other countries, it's pathologists. I don't believe that children, and when I say children, I say children that are typically developing whatever, have communication difficulties. I believe difficult environments can create a breakdown in communication, which may need to be mediated, but I believe that that's a societal thing, and I believe that's an environmental thing. I don't think that that is something innate in a person or in a child. And also, if we go back to the roots of speech and language therapy, which is all about correcting and fixing, it's that biopolitical aspect is about people, usually minoritized Black and brown bodies, that or disabled bodies, that do not fit the norm of this kind of like white standard, who may not be profitable to the economy, need to be fixed and sorted out so they can be profitable to the economy. So that's that biopolitical aspect of it. The pathologizing nature of it is, well, in the creation of the profession, well, how are we going to get clients? You know, we have to create a level of pathology, right? That's how we get contracted. That's how we get jobs. That's how we, you know, we need bodies, and black and brown bodies is what we use. It's a commodification. If we can pathologize black and brown bodies and say they have communication difficulties, and we can also create disorders, yeah? So this thing called, everybody might get mad with me, developmental language disorder, right? It used to be called specific language impairment. Now it's called developmental language disorder. You can't have a developmental language disorder. Where's the gene for that? But if you can get that into the DSM-5, and you can make people believe that children are born with an inherent difficulty, a lifelong communication difficulty, you've got a client base for a really long time. It legitimizes your profession because it's a disorder that only you can treat.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So as you're speaking, right, like our school is a one-way dual language, so we speak Spanish and English. And as I think about who are the majority of my students who are receiving speech and language services, it is my bilingual Hispanic or Spanish-speaking students. Well, I can tell you want to jump in, Maurice. That is like, I had never thought of it, right? Like by pathologizing it, you're legitimizing, and you will always have clients. That was deep.
And you will always have black and brown bodies, because how else do we commoditize black and brown bodies now that we don't have slavery?
Woo, okay, hold on. Things just got real. Things just got.
I mean, this is just my opinion. This is just my critical.
It's true. No, I think, as Maurice mentioned, our own research and presentation and professional development that we provide, like even what you're saying right now, that's exactly what we're talking about. So we're seeing it. I think that what you're saying is you make an excellent point.
But don't you, but don't you think it's fascinating that a speech and language pathologist that you may employ or engage with will never break it down to you like that?
Ever.
No. But mine is a white woman.
Mine is too.
You break it down.
And I don't think that I was thinking about, like, okay, am I going to share this episode with my SOP? Because what would be her response? I don't think she's ready, and not out of necessarily ill intent, right? I think out of systemic understandings. I think if I shared this with her, she would go to the union. Well, she is our union rep, but like she would like he's bullying me, or like it would get real quick.
I've been so I don't want to jump in, but I've been thinking about this a lot. So like the ideas that I'm sharing didn't just come to me. It's a progression, observation of years, and then putting bits and pieces together to build a picture for myself. So what I believe is, and it's not all white speech and language therapists, but white people, some, have this inherent belief in meritocracy, and they have this inherent belief that the system is fair. If you're black or you're brown, or you've experienced racism and you know that the system discriminates against you, you always critically analyze it, and you go down deep inside, and it's easier for you to see all the cracks in it. Mm-hmm. When you're white and you haven't experienced that, unless you really do the work, you make an assumption that everything that you're doing is right and good. And so you never question yourself and go, why is 90% of my caseload black and brown boys? Mm-hmm. Is it because black and brown children inherently have communication difficulties, or is there something going on with how I'm testing them? Because they inherently believe that the system is fair.
Yes.
They don't have to question it.
You know, this is the perfect segue because, again, I'm so happy that, you know, I found you on Twitter and I was telling Maurice, like, yo, you got to check this out. We want to do a little bit of a Twitter dive, if that's okay with you. I'm going to read a couple of your tweets and then you can give me some thoughts. Okay, so I'll take one here because you just kind of talked about it, right? The research seeking to legitimize the word gap and then provide solutions to reduce it is not social justice work, but reinforces white supremacy.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add to that?
I mean, I think it's pretty clear. There is no such thing as a word gap. I remember in my training at university, they taught me that there's the Hart and Risley study, that there's a 30 million word gap.
We learned about that too.
I believe that. I believed in social deprivation of language. I believed that if you were a poor family, you spoke less to your children, hence why they needed speech and language therapy. I did not have the tools to critically analyze when I was in university, because this information was presented to me as fact. Mm-hmm. and I believed it until I started to analyze it. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't exist, but also once again, it's the commodification, it's the monetization, it's the people that build careers off the back of pathologizing Black and brown bodies. Mm-hmm. They can't keep you on the plantation farm anymore. They're going to keep you in their system in another way. And so that's what I believe it is. And there's all this stuff about, well, more vocabulary means more life chances. Well, if systematic racism exists, it doesn't matter how good I speak. I'm still going to be impacted, right? I might speak well, but I'll still experience it. Vocabulary, more words. Why do you need more words when one is enough? So it's this kind of like capitalistic white supremacy thing, which is about more this and more that and more this is better. That's not true. And right. These are times that we have to shift about, if I know one word for if I know happy, that's great. If I want to learn excited, that's fine, but happy works.
Yeah.
Why do I need to learn 10 different words for that? And it's this idea of having more, even if you don't use it.
Well, and then it goes back to your point of like, it's created to show a problem where there is none, right? Like, I have enough words in my repertoire. So like, by saying there's this word gap, now suddenly you have a problem. Now, white supremacy, capitalistic, all of those words are, very, I would want to say controversial. And you have a tweet about, miss me with this narrative because I am a Black woman, highlighting racism and ableism in our profession. And that makes me divisive. Yeah, take a little sip for that one, huh?
Hashtag true story.
I loved it. And
that's a true story. That just, I tell you this honestly, I am incredibly careful with what I say in terms of if I'm precise, I'm to the point, and I don't point fingers at people or organizations, right? Because I know that what I say is being scrutinized because people don't like it, right? And so I find it so interesting that the narrative exists that I think I wrote a tweet which said that, our profession is, the foundations are racist and ableist ideologies. That's a very straight and simple thing. And actually, that's a fact. That's not something I've made up in my head. It's a fact. And there's this speech and language therapist, and it's a white lady. They always are. They always are, because they love to school you. So for the past 2 years, my tweets are not just on the whim, they're intentional. And the reason why they're intentional is, in my field of speech and language therapy in the UK, we need critical analysis of the way that we work, right? And the only way that we can have that is if I keep saying it. So the issue of our assessments being racist is not going away. So therefore, what are we going to do about it? And if we're not going to do anything about it, I'm going to make sure at every opportunity I mention it till it becomes a thorn in your side. People love it when you talk about race in a niche way. You talk about once a year at a conference. They sure as hell hate it when you speak about it for 2 years in a row. it pisses them off, right? So this lady, I don't even know her, but I know she knows me. That's how it works. Somebody said to me, you know, if speech language therapy is so bad, why are you still in the profession? And it's like, you see, racism isn't just people calling you the N-word and doing that. It's the subtleties of the language. That means basically, if you don't like it here, why don't you go back home? It's the subtlety of, if you're complaining about the racism, why don't you go somewhere else, right? And so we know what these narratives are. And then I think her friend had to come and defend her and say, yes, it's what you're saying is divisive. Relentless criticism has happened. The people that I follow take me on a journey. And I just think, I'm not here to take you on a journey. You are not my audience. I'm not here for you. So, but then
don't make it about you. Stop centralizing yourself.
And so this narrative of me being an angry Black woman, no matter what I say or do, is just something, it's a card that they play. So I can make a statement and say speech language therapy is racist and has ableist ideologies and foundations. That's a fact. When it's a Black woman that says that, it makes you seem, they want to call you angry, because they can't silence you. They have no power over you. So the only thing that they can do is, I call it triple D. They like to, what's it called? I forget what it is anyways. But all I know is that they will try to discredit you. And then there's another one that they try to do. They'll denial,
discredit,
and then something else. They love to do that. And
distract, I think is what it is.
Distract, yeah. And it's this narrative. It's so pervasive that you don't even, it's just the narrative that they have.
Or I'm sorry, what a girl, yes. And I know, Maurice, you know what I mean, but I know I'm gonna let you jump in. It has also been my experience that they will do something to you or disrespect you, and because you don't allow it and you call them to it, so because you respond, you're suddenly the aggressor, but they did something to you first, right? And because you address it, and they expect you to not hold them accountable, right? And if you call them out, it could be as polite as anything, and it will be perceived as an attack on them when they were the ones who tried to attack you first. It's exhausting.
I just want to jump in and say, and I think Lisette and I have talked about this before, that there is a particular intersectionality too when you are a woman of color, right? That anger piece is thrown at you a little bit more, that because it's, oh, well, she's being emotional. Here's the thing. I got to a place in one conversation with a Black female colleague of mine, and I said, yeah, she probably is angry. That's okay. Anger is a real emotion. And if you went through this every day, you would probably be angry too. So you calling me angry as if it's somehow a slight to me? No, guess what? I'm a human being. And so sometimes things make me angry. And if I express that anger, that's me being human. The issue, of course, is that sometimes we are not given that permission to be human. And you know, you've mentioned you've mentioned you know, you think about slavery. During slavery, you're not allowed to be angry. Someone could literally hit a person you care about in front of you, and you're not allowed to be angry, right? And so some of that has transitioned still into our society, where even though anger is a very real human emotion, and you think about, I was my first year as an administrator. This 6'3" white man, our superintendent at the time, came in and was angry. He yelled at us, and he was allowed to do that because he was a 6'3" white man, and he was the one in power, right? And so there, I think there's a piece to all of that. I want to ask a question though, because this has really got me thinking critically, particularly because yesterday I sat in the office of my SLP and we were talking about some kids with an IEP, and we were talking about their need to increase their vocabulary. And so now you've kind of called me to the carpet here, because now I'm kind of like, okay, well, let me rethink what I'm saying. I think in order to have success in the system as it currently exists, there is a need for this, but then how do we work to change the system so that way there's less of a need, right? So I think there's this balance. So when I was talking with my wife about the fact that we were going to interview you, and we kind of got to this conversation of code switching. And I'm interested in kind of your perspective on code switching, because my wife says to me, she says, well, then based on some of the things that you're sharing, is code switching. By the way, my wife is a white woman who's down for the people, though. Let me tell you,
she really is.
Oh my goodness. Hey,
well,
hey,
the thing is, we're down for humanity. I'm down for humanity. So I'm down for everybody that's down for me.
Absolutely. So, but she says, okay, so then is code switching, are we really, by celebrating code switching, are we actually celebrating something that is not a skill? We kind of talk about it as a skill. And I said, for me personally, I thought about having been born and raised in DeKalb, Illinois, which when I was growing up was like 79% white. I was like the only Black kid, in class coming through. And so I grew up speaking like I was from DeKalb. Mm-hmm. And then as I got older, came into my teen years, and we had an influx of Black people coming into the community, and I began to become more conscious. I actually adapted and adopted language that had come from folk who were coming from the city and from bigger urban areas, right? So I actually talk about the idea that maybe, AAVE, or Ebonics, as I call it, is actually my second language, right? Whereas what may be considered standard English was my first, that's what I grew up speaking in school until later. But I think about code switching all the time. I say all of that to say kind of what's your perspective then on code switching?
Firstly, I'd like to say my Black doesn't have to sound like your Black. So just to affirm you there. So there is not a sound like you sound like you. That's what you sound like. The second thing with code switching is it's I prefer register shifting. Register shifting is when I speak to you, I'm speaking to you differently. When I speak to my gran, I change how I speak. When I speak to my dad, I change how I speak. When I speak to a partner, so we are always register shifting. It's not like a race thing or a class thing. Everybody shifts the register to fit where they are at. If you're at a funeral, if you're at a wedding, if you're at a party, if you're talking to a loved one, we all register shift. So register shifting, that's cool, because that's, that is what it is. Code, when we make a conscious decision to go, oh, we're going to code switch, that means I'm going to put on my white voice, or I'm going to put on my, do you know what I'm saying? And that is changing your identity to fit in with something, because to get more privileges, or you feel that that's the way that you should be. You can speak AAVE and register shift. So speaking with your grandmother, speaking with your mother, speaking with the pastor or the imam of the mosque, that's register shifting. We all do that, and that is totally normal. Code switching, that conscious decision that I'm now going to put on my white voice, that ain't right.
Okay, but can I keep it real? Because I'm always the real honest one. Sure. I do joke about like, oh, I'm going to work, I got to put on my customer service voice.
Yeah, well, it's something you have to. And I'm going through this shift now with my own identity, because I'm like, who am I when I'm not like putting on these masks and doing these different things? Sure. There is this weird pressure that whenever, before a while back, if I was ever going to a professional meeting, I would put on that yes, and change even my whole countenance would be less, like this, and it would be very, that's interesting, yes, definitely, sure, yeah, I'd love to. So I'd do that. You're right. I don't do that anymore, because I know that I am enough as I am. And if you, the receiver, don't receive it, that's your business. So now when I go to a meeting, whether it's the biggest professor here or whether it's this or that, I talk how I want to talk. And because I deserve to talk how I want to talk. So there is
a kind of girl. Yes.
You can register shift where you keep to the tone of where you are, because that's a societal norm, but you bring all of you, because actually now that I bring all of me everywhere, number one, it's easier to be me. Number two, I'm more likable. And number three, I feel like this stress off my shoulders, and it allows me to think more freely and connect with people. So these are the benefits of taking off that mask. But it's very hard because we've been programmed you just automatically will do it. You'll go to the bank and suddenly you'll shift.
You know, it's so interesting to hear you. Like, okay, I often used to think like, I'm on this journey myself where I am growing in the comfort of who I am, and trying to be authentically me in all settings. But there were times where, you know, when you are a person of color, you do feel like if you don't represent your community well, then you're not doing them any favors. But I also think that by putting on that mask that you speak of, it's actually causing more damage, because now you're suddenly the exception and not the norm. And so you need to be able to hear me speak the way that I speak authentically and still see me as an intelligent, competent, loving individual. And so that actually perhaps can cause more damage to your community as opposed to, you know, trying to shift perceptions.
But and also with this whole paradigm shifting of norm, like what is the good version of you like? Or what is the professional version of you like? Or the scholarly version of you like? And that's like, those are all kind of concepts. It's you as you are. And you have to learn to like deconstruct all of the other stuff that you've learned about your identity, where you've been shamed. And it's not just like in white spaces, it's more is probably in Black spaces. If you went to, and they go, oh, you sound white. And it's that not being accepted. And it's like, actually, no, I sound how I sound. And I am who I am, whether this community likes it or this community likes it. I'm always going to be me here, here, and here. I'm gonna constantly be me, instead of having to shift who I am, because that's not fair on me. That is damaging to your sense of self.
You're my kind of girl. We might have to do a second episode, like a follow-up.
Some joint PD, you know what I'm saying? That's what I'm thinking. Maybe some joint PD.
It's so refreshing to be with someone. I'm so sorry, Maurice. It's just so refreshing to be with someone who gets it. Like, it is. It's great.
Yeah. We want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. We have a tradition here at BBB. And speaking of being my true self is a dog owner. So you may hear my dog going wild in the background. I'm just going to throw that out there. But we have a tradition here at BBB that we like to ask our guests to leave us with some parting words. If there was one thing, folk fast forwarded to the end of the episode and this was the one thing you wanted them to walk away with, what would that be?
I'm going to say my little statement. Speech and language therapy as a profession is biopolitical, colonial, and racist, and I stand on that.
She said it, folks. She ain't back it up. So what's up?
She said what she said.
Drop the mic. Okay, it is what it is. And if y'all want to fight about it, we can fight about it. Thank you again for joining us for Black, Brown, and Bilingue. I am Maurice McDavid.
And I'm Lisa Jacobson. Muchas gracias for tuning in.
Adios.